Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for Saturday, April 28th, 2018. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyung Moon. And it's a rather mild morning right now in the Cheongguk area. The temperature is in the upper 40s, and it's rather cloudy. And this is the 13th day of the heavenly calendar, so we're getting close to a full moon up in the sky there. And it's going to be a rather mild day today, but tomorrow it's going to cool off somewhat. I want to go directly to the what I was planning to do today, which is to go through the people who are running for election in the Republican primary on May 15th. I sent the tech team some links, so I'd like to ask the tech team now to go into that first link and bring that up on the screen for our people to see, for our viewers to see. And this is the link to the Pike County Office of Elections office. Now, everyone lives in a different county and state and so forth, and if you're outside of Pennsylvania, you can go to your own county, your own state, and each county in America has its own elections board and elections office. So you can use this as an example to go to your own elections office and go to your own sample ballot and figure out who you want to vote for. In Pennsylvania, the Republican and Democratic primaries are being held on May 15th, and that's why we're doing this today, because it's less than 3 weeks away. So anyway, let's look at the Elections Office website for the Pike County, Pennsylvania. And it says here that the Election Office maintains and controls all activities related to voter registration at elections under the supervision of the Pike County Board of Elections. The office prepares machine ballots, programs voting machines, processes and issues absentee ballots, oversees district election workers, and maintains county and local candidate filings for elected offices. In addition, the office also maintains record of county election results, campaign finance filings, polling places, and district election workers. And then there's information on absentee ballot applications. If you're not going to be in your place of residence on May 15th, then you can apply for an absentee ballot. And you can do that up to 1 week before the actual election. So the election is May 15th, so you can apply for an absentee ballot by May 8th. Now you have to actually, the application has to reach the office by May 8th, so be careful of that. Don't be late. And then there's what's called a 2018 UMOVA notice. That's just the legal notice saying that there's going to be an election on May 15th. And then you have the 2018 sample ballots. Now, on May 15th, in order to vote, you have to have two things. One, you have to have registered on or before April 16th. If you registered after April 16th, then you can still vote in the general election in the fall, but you cannot vote in the primary election on May 15th. Now that's Pennsylvania law, and the laws will be different in other states. Second thing, in order to vote on May 15th, when you registered, you have to have registered either as a Democrat or a Republican. That also is different in state to state. When I lived in Virginia, at least at that time, when you registered to vote, you didn't declare a party affiliation at all. They didn't even ask you. And so when the primary day came, you could vote in either primary. You couldn't vote in both, but you could vote in either one. But that's different in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, when you register, you have to register either as a Democrat or a Republican or as an independent, or maybe they give you other choices as well, maybe the Libertarian Party or the Constitutional Party, something like that. But in order to vote in this election on May 15th, you must be on the rolls as a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. Well, when I registered as a Republican, and so I'm going to go through the Republican ballot with you today. And so you see the 2018 sample ballots, and then you see the ballots that they have a list of all the precincts. Now, so a precinct is the smallest unit for the elections process. A precinct is basically, it's a polling place, and I'll show you in a minute. in my case. For example, and if the tech team will go to the sample ballot now, bring that up. Can you bring that up on the screen? You see the official Republican ballot, and it says Green Township. Green Township is the township where I'm living. And on that list a while ago, you saw a whole list of townships, and some, for example, Dingman Township has 2 precincts. We have Dingman 1 and Dingman 2. And if you live in Dingman Township, you need to know which of those 2 precincts you are living in. Because if you go to the wrong precinct, if you go to the wrong polling place, and this happened to me once, I moved and I actually registered at my new address, and then when the polling day came, when voting day came, I forgot. And I went to my old polling place, and they looked through, and they said, "I'm sorry, sir, you're not on this list. You can't vote." So it was kind of embarrassing because, because I was standing in line all that time, and I had to walk away without voting. So be careful. If you want to know where you vote, where you can vote, just Google where's my polling place or something like that, and there are various websites where you can input your address, and they'll tell you where you're supposed to go to vote. So anyway, everyone in Green Township in Pennsylvania, because it's a small township, we all go to the same place. Here, and it says the instructions to voters to vote black in the oval completely next to the candidate. So this is a paper ballot, and actuality we use machine ballots, but in some cases paper ballots are used, but in most cases we have the machine ballots. So let's start going through the races here, and some of them apply to all of Pennsylvania. Some of them apply to the 8th Congressional District, where I'm living, and where many members of the congregation at Newfoundland are living. And we'll go through. And so I encourage you to use this as both information, also as inspiration, so that if I'm talking about races that don't apply to you or where you're living, then use the methodology that I'm doing now to look up your own candidates, look up your own sample ballot, because sample ballots are available not just in Pennsylvania, but I think in pretty much every county in America. And go through those and check before you go to the polling place who you want to vote for. It's not so good if you're going and you're standing there at the voting booth and you're looking at a list of names and you have no idea who these people are. That's kind of not so good, because you want to know who you're voting for, because these people are going to be making important decisions on your behalf in the coming years. All right, let's go through the first one. United States Senator Jim Christiana and Lou Barletta. Now, the current senator, we have 2 senators from Pennsylvania, obviously. Each state has 2, and we have right now Bob Casey is up for re-election, and he is a Democratic senator. And he 6 years ago, senators are elected every 6 years, and every 2 years, a third of the Senate is re-elected. So he was elected 6 years ago, and he was elected as a conservative Democrat, and he said, "Oh yes, I'm for gun rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." But he has not really worked out so well as a representative for the values of Pennsylvania people, especially Northeast Pennsylvania. He's certainly a lot weaker on gun rights than anyone had hoped, and recently he's actually been coming out more in favor of gun control than gun rights. And besides, with the paper-thin majority that the Republicans have in the Senate right now, President Trump needs all the support that he can get. If he could have a few more than votes in the Senate, then he could get his agenda passed much more easily. You saw how Obamacare repeal failed by 1 vote. If we had Republican senator in there instead of Bob Casey, Obamacare would be dead today, as one of these videos points out. All right, let's. I'd like to ask the tech team if you can also play it so that I can see it. The link that says a Barletta video. Go down a bit. Oh, I see. Are you using ad block? Yeah, you're using ad block. So if you, yeah, whitelist this site, yeah, okay, then the ad will, the video will come up. There we go. Okay, let's watch this video. It's about 2 minutes long.
You're going downtown? What about parking?
Can we get some volume?
Remain reserved and paid for. Dad, oil change at the Ford dealership, $5.30. And gas is cheapest at the place on the corner.
That's Ford, America's best-selling brand.
Can we get some volume?
Congressman Lou Barletta once made national headlines as mayor of Hazleton with his crackdown on illegal immigrants. Now he's a candidate in the Republican primary for the U.S. Senate, hoping to challenge Democrat Bob Casey in the fall.
I realize that one vote in the Senate can make the difference. Had I been there instead of Bob Casey, Obamacare would be gone today. And how many more times will one vote make the difference?
President Trump encouraged Lou Barletta to run for the Senate, and Barletta was an early backer of Trump. He's a believer in President Trump's tax cuts for individuals and corporations.
You can't say you like jobs but want to kill business. That's just like saying you like eggs but want to kill the chicken. You can't do that. We have to grow the economy. And
he challenges projections that tax cuts could balloon the deficit.
if we see 1% growth from the tax cut, it wipes out the deficit. So, you know, Washington has its own way of cooking the books and speaking.
Barletta claims he's more in sync with the values of Pennsylvanians than the Democratic incumbent.
I think Bob Casey's a nice guy, and I think he's a good senator for California or Massachusetts, not for Pennsylvania.
Barletta is not the only Republican seeking to challenge Casey. State Representative Jim Christiana of Beaver County is also running in the primary without state party endorsement. Barletta backs President Trump's plan to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico.
We need to secure the borders. They've been talking about this since I was mayor back in 2000, and it still hasn't been done, and it's a threat to our country.
With Commitment 2018 coverage, Bob Mayo, Pittsburgh's Action News 4.
Okay. All right, thank you. So as the video said, President Trump encouraged Barletta to run. He's up against Jim Christiana, but it looks pretty sure that that Barletta is going to win this primary. Christiana is a young man who is running basically on the basis that he is young, and that we need younger people in the Senate. And you know, I watched his campaign video and so forth, and he seems like a pretty nice guy. But I think, you know, based on President Trump's endorsement of Barletta and the need to have a very strong candidate to go up against Bob Casey in November, I think Barletta is the pretty clear choice for Republican voters on May 15th. So I'm endorsing Barletta for the Senate race against Jim Christiana. All right, let's go down next to the governor's race. Here we've got Tom Wolf. Phew, wow. You know, Huffington Post went through and it was a few years back, but they went through all the 50 governors of the United States of America and rated them from most liberal to most conservative. And Huffington Post, not me, Huffington Post rated Tom Wolf as the most liberal governor in America. Yikes. What is going on? How did Pennsylvania wind up with the most liberal governor in America? Something definitely needs to be done about that. And sure enough, yeah, he's been a very socialist type of governor over the past 4 years, and he's running for re-election. If we don't really get out the vote in November, we're going to have another 4 years of Tom Wolf. And so we need a strong candidate that's a strong Republican and conservative candidate that is going to go up against Tom Wolf. And probably almost anyone would be better than Tom Wolf. I mean, you know, if a Democrat were going up against Tom Wolf, I would probably endorse the Democrat. That's how bad Tom Wolf is. But let's look at the situation here. I want to go through. Let's who is going up against him for one thing. There's a Scott Wagner, and Paul Mango, and Laura Ellsworth are the three candidates who are vying for the opportunity to go up against Tom Wolf in November. These three people, Scott Wagner, Paul Mango, and Laura Ellsworth, are all Republicans, and on May 15th we'll be deciding which one of them will be going up against Tom Wolf in November. And the race really is between Wagner and Mango. Laura Ellsworth is a rather weak candidate in comparison to Wagner and Mango, so it's really a choice between the two. And by the way, you see a blank line below there. That means that if you want to write in someone else's name, you can do that as well, if that's what you want to do. But let's look at Scott Wagner versus Paul Mango. Now, Paul Mango appeared on the King's Report with the King a couple months ago, and he was quite impressive on that appearance in terms of abortion, right to life, in terms of gun control, gun rights, and other issues. He was very much, Paul Mango was very much in sync with the second king of Cheongguk. And he seems to be a pretty good candidate for us to endorse this time, for me to endorse. Well, let's look at the article that AdWatch has on this, because recently this has turned into a kind of a mudslinging race, you might say. So let's look at this article in the York Daily Record about the AdWatch's take on this campaign. Key attacks in the Pennsylvania PA Republican race for governor. Television attack ads are flying between Scott Wagner and Paul Mango in Pennsylvania's Republican primary for governor, with a month until the election, where GOP voters will pick a challenger to take on a Democratic Governor Tom Wolf. This article was written about 12 days ago. Attack ads being aired by Mango and Wagner are playing on TV screens across the state, and it could stay that way until the May 15th primary election. Well, maybe you've seen one of these. I have not, because I don't have a television in my home. And, you know, I remember when I did have a television, when it got to be sort of a month before the election, whatever election it was, I would just stop watching any news concerning the election, because it got to be so ridiculous and so over the top. I would generally make up my mind on who I was going to vote for a month before the election, and then just unless something really major happened, just go the rest of the month with that, because in the final month before election, everybody goes crazy. But anyway, let's look at these attack ads that are going on right now. Wagner and Mango had until recently battled over who is the most conservative candidate, but they also have taken shots at each other's records or their company's records in the private sector. Meanwhile, a third Republican candidate, Laura Ellsworth, cast herself as the mature alternative an analysis of key claims by NTV ads aired by Mango and Wagner. So first is that Mango is accusing Wagner of being a deadbeat dad. So let's look at that. Mango's 30-second ad that began airing April 4th used a cartoon figure of Wagner and pounded him as a slumlord, a polluter, a sleazy bail bondsman, a greedy businessman, and perhaps, most damning, a deadbeat dad. In question was Mango's ad's contention that Wagner was hauled into court in order to pay $800,000 in back alimony and child support. The allegation was based on Wagner's long-running child support and alimony case. It followed the 2008 separation from his third wife and involved support for his youngest daughter, Christina. A judge found in 2012 that Wagner had an $800,000 overdue payment in a case stemming from a dispute over Wagner's income that should be considered eligible for calculating his support obligations. The judge's opinion noted that Wagner had made support payments going back to the separation. A lawyer who has 26 years focusing on family law, John F. King of suburban Harrisburg, said the term deadbeat dad is a somewhat subjective term. After looking over the judge's decision in Wagner's case, King concluded that Wagner certainly did not turn his back on wife and child. He just dramatically underpaid based upon his legal obligation until ordered by the court to do otherwise, he wrote in an email. Okay, well, that seems pretty bad. I mean, so in other words, Wagner's ad is certainly not incorrect, although it may be a little bit exaggerated perhaps, but certainly not incorrect. But the fundamental facts of the ad turn out to be true. A deadbeat dad, King said, is often used to describe someone who tries to avoid their support obligation. Mr. Wagner did not try to avoid his obligation, King wrote. He did, however, try to seriously mitigate it. The case dragged on for 3 years because it was a complex case and required fact-finding, expert analysis, and numerous hearings, King said. Wagner's campaign said he had paid child support on time, and his lawyers in the case told the York Daily Record in 2013 that the sides ultimately settled the case in a confidential agreement. All right. And then, meanwhile, Wagner accuses Mango of being an Obamacare advocate. So let's see if that's true. A 30-second ad that Wagner began airing March 13th made several claims about Mango or the consultancy where he worked for nearly 3 decades, McKinsey & Company. One key claim calls Mango the leading advocate for Obamacare, the sweeping federal health care called the Affordable Care Act that former President Obama signed in 2010. Mango spent most of his time at McKinsey as a healthcare systems consultant before leaving the company in early 2017 to run for governor. In support of the claim, the Wagner campaign cited little more than a 2009 magazine article in which Mango agreed with hospital system officials that universal insurance with subsidies for the poor would greatly reduce hospital losses, and a paper Mango co-authored in 2007 that cited mandated coverage as one of various approaches health systems use for fixed problems. In any case, Wagner's campaign did not identify a single statement by Mango that urged Congress to pass the legislation or suggested that Mango was a leading advocate. Jonathan Gruber, a Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist who was a consultant to the Obama administration on technical aspects of the healthcare law, said he had never heard of Mango. So how could he be a leading advocate if this guy had never heard of him? Also, Joanne Alker, a prominent healthcare policy researcher and executive director of the Center for Children and Families of Georgetown University in Washington, said she had never heard of Mango and would not characterize McKinsey as in any way instrumental in the fight for the healthcare law. McKinsey itself says it is a nonpartisan and neutral on policy. If anything, McKinsey was noted for a report it produced in 2011 that gave a much harsher assessment than the Obama administration of the law's effect on private sector employer-provided insurance. Mango said he never advocated for the healthcare law and supports its repeal. All right, so in the battle of the attack ads, it seems that to me that the Mango ad against Wagner has a great deal of a pretty big kernel of truth, a pretty substantially true, whereas the opposite is not the case. I would say that based on this information that Wagner's attack ad against Mango doesn't have any kernel of truth, actually, as far as I can tell. So I would say that this does not affect my support for Paul Mango. So in the governor's race, I'm supporting Paul Mango. Let's see. I'm looking at the chat line to see if anybody else wants to comment on this, but I don't see anything in English. I see that people are translating into Korean and into Japanese. Thank you very much for doing that. It looks like Yuko Morita is translating into Japanese, and who's doing the Starry, I guess, is doing the Korean. Okay, well, thank you for those two people. And if anybody wants to comment on the chat line in English or in Japanese or Korean as well, I will try to read those comments online, and also we can discuss that. And as I said, if anybody wants to come in here directly and talk with me, we can do that as well. Now, the next race is for lieutenant governor. Now, each of the 50 American states has its own constitution. I'm saying that because I've seen that some people don't realize this. And it's different from other countries. For example, in Japan or Korea, Japan has prefectures, they call them in English, and Korea has provinces. And the prefectures and provinces do not have their own constitution. They're basically follow the national constitution. But America is different, because America is a country that is made up of states. You have the states first, and then the states come together to form the country. So each state has its own constitution, and the Constitution of Pennsylvania, actually it's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, has it so that the governor and lieutenant governor are elected separately. And that's different from the federal Constitution, which has the president and vice president elected together on one ticket. So sometimes this causes problems, the way that Pennsylvania does it, because you get a governor and lieutenant governor who don't really work together very well. But actually, under the federal Constitution, the same is true. I mean, Kennedy and Johnson did not get along, and also, other president and vice presidents have not gotten together and have not gotten along very, very well either. When in the federal Constitution, in the federal election, when the presidential candidate chooses his vice president, there are various sort of calculations that go in there. But basically, the role of the vice presidential candidate, the role of that candidate is to get the presidential candidate elected. And once the presidential candidate is elected, there's not much else for him to do in the federal system. So they may not really get along all that well. Anyway, let's look at, so there's, just to point out that there's a separate election for lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania, and we have 4 candidates here: Kathy Coder, Diana Irie Vaughn, Jeff Bartos, and Peg Luksic. And in this lieutenant governor election, I'm endorsing Diana Irie Vaughn simply because that is the person that Paul Mango says he wants to work with. In the case of Scott Wagner, he has endorsed Jeff Bartos. And in fact, if we go around, driving around, when I see Scott Wagner's campaign sort of posters, it says, Wagner and Bartos. So he's actually put Bartos's name on his posters. Now, Mango has not done that, and really officially, it's kind of confusing to people when Wagner does that and makes it appear as though he and Bartos are running on the same ticket. That's not the way the Pennsylvania election system works. But anyway, Mango has said that he wants to work with Diana Irie Vaughn, and so I think that's good enough to endorse that candidate. Now, going now to the next election, representative in the Congress, 8th District, a 2-year term. John Trin, Robert Kunigal, and Joe Peters. So in the congressional election, we have a situation where until January of next year, We are in the 10th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 18 congressional districts, and we are in number 10. But as you may have heard, and I'm sure if listeners, viewers of the King's Report know by now, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ripped up the congressional district map of Pennsylvania. And they imposed their own map, which, in my opinion, doesn't really go very far, but my opinion is against the Pennsylvania Constitution. But what do you do when the Supreme Court goes against the Constitution? There's no recourse, unless you're in the Chattanooga Constitution, because in that case you have the king, and it's ultimately the king in the Chattanooga Constitution who protects the rights of the citizens. But we've seen, we can go through several cases in the history of the United States where the United States Supreme Court has gone against the United States Constitution. And later on, they may correct themselves. And in this case, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court went against the Pennsylvania Constitution. But there's no recourse. There's nothing we can do about it. So anyway, they ripped up the congressional district map and imposed their own. I mean, they hired some redistricting expert and this professor or something sort of drew some lines on the map, and the Supreme Court said, okay, this is the new district map. So anyway, we had a really, and still now until January, we have a wonderful congressman, Tom Marino. But we have to say goodbye to him. He's running for re-election, but not in our district, because he lives over in a different part of what is currently the 10th district, and that's going to be a different district come January. So instead of Tom Marino, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has given us a Democratic incumbent. So unless we can replace him, that's who's going to be that Democratic incumbent is going to be our congressman come January. Not a good situation. Let's look at the, the River Reporter story here on, wait a second here. I wanted to see, not that. Let's see here. Okay. Oh. Okay, yes, the River Reporter story, yes, okay. Is that, yes, that's the one I want to look at. Let's go through that. Residents of Wayne and Pike counties, which are in Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District, will have a new representative in Congress next year because of the new congressional map ordered by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Because of the inclusion of the cities of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, the district now has about 230,000 registered Democrats and 146,000 registered Republicans. These Democrats, however, tend to be fairly conservative, and 3 Republican candidates are running for the seat, which will be open. Tom Marino, who currently represents Wayne and Pike, is running in a neighboring district. One of the Republican candidates is Joe Peters, a former federal prosecutor. His website lists one of his accomplishments as, quote, the convictions of Philadelphia mob boss Little Nicky Scarfo, his underboss, and 16 mob soldiers in a 3-month trial before an anonymous and sequestered jury, unquote. The website does not detail many of his positions on various issues, but it does say Joe is pro-life and a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. In the past, he has been A-rated by the NRA. He graduated from King's College and later the Dickinson School of Law. He is a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, where he sits on its terrorism committee. Now, this article does not mention that Joe Peters was the assistant drug czar in the White House for a number of years. And he's very much interested in the opioid crisis where Governor Tom Wolf has already declared a state of emergency. And that's kind of controversial because, according to Pennsylvania law, when the governor declares a state of emergency, we cannot open carry a firearm unless we also have a license to carry firearms. So if you have a license to carry firearms, then you can open carry under a state of emergency declaration. But without that card, without that license to carry firearms or CCW license, you cannot open carry during a state of emergency. So the Republicans have attacked Tom Wolf on this, and the Democrats said, well, we're not really going to enforce that. But that's a kind of a strange situation, isn't it, where they force people to break the law, but then say, oh, don't worry, we're not going to enforce the law, so you have nothing to worry about. Well, that's not how it's supposed to work. And declaring the state of emergency, they say, okay, this frees up funding, and da-da-da-da-da. But the drug war, the war on drugs, has had the effect of centralizing authority in the federal government, and also increasing police powers, and has not done much to actually combat drugs. It's not the federal government that can solve that problem. So anyway, we'll get into that a little bit later. So here then says, continuing on this article, the second Republican candidate is John Trinh, who, according to his website, rose through the ranks during his 20-year investment banking career to become a managing director at J.P. Morgan Chase. He later taught business courses at Lehigh University. Among his positions is this: America's immigration system is broken. We need to secure our borders not only as a critical matter of national security, but to also prevent illegal immigrants and contraband like drugs from flowing into our country. He also says he is a lifelong member of the NRA, that Obamacare has failed and driven up costs for everyone, and that he is pro-life and will protect the sanctity of life. The third Republican candidate is Robert J. Kunigal, a former corrections officer. His website says, I've worked in blue-collar jobs many years before putting myself through college at the age of 50, earning a degree in criminal justice. On abortion, he writes, I believe that life begins at conception. This is a scientific fact. Inert objects do not grow. What level of respect for life should a healthy society promote? He writes that Americans should be accepting of immigrants, but he quotes President Theodore Roosevelt, adding, this is predicated upon the man's becoming in very fact an American and nothing but an American, meaning learning the language, etc. The Pennsylvania primary election will be held on May 15th. The Democratic candidate, Matt Cartwright, began serving in Congress. Matt Cartwright is our incumbent now, serving in Congress in another district in northeast Pennsylvania in 2013. Before that, he worked as an attorney for 25 years. On health care, he says Matt would have supported President Obama's Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. He remains dissatisfied, however, that it did not go far enough to expand health care coverage for more Americans and hold insurance companies more accountable for what they charge families. On the environment, Congressman Cartwright recognizes the connection between the production of American energy and the strength of the American economy. At the same time, he feels that energy production and environmental protection are not mutually exclusive. His website does not directly address the Second Amendment, abortions, or immigration. We need to replace Matt Cartwright, and I think the best candidate to do that will be John Trinh. When I look at the three candidates, I think, as I said in an earlier broadcast, we can do a little bit of process elimination and eliminate Robert Kunigal. He does not impress me as a strong candidate, a person who has strong positions, a person who can go to Congress and in Congress, because he's going to be one of more than 400 members of the House. He has to be able to create coalitions and propose legislation, and then talk to his colleagues and get co-sponsors and things like this. And Robert Kunigal doesn't seem to me to be that kind of person. He doesn't have that kind of energy level, for one thing. I respect the fact that he's had a series of blue-collar jobs and everything, but I think among the three, he is the weakest candidate, and so I eliminate him. So between Joe Peters and John Trinh, Joe Peters' weak point, I think, is his first of all, his lack of transparency. He's really not, as the article just now pointed out, he's really not telling us very much about his positions. He goes on the fact that he was the federal prosecutor who put away some mafia figures in Philadelphia, and he was and also on his website, although the article doesn't mention it, he mentions that he was very instrumental in the office of the drug czar under the president, under the White House. And he wants to use that experience, and I expect that if Peters gets into office, his focus will be on the war on drugs. And I'm not in favor of the government playing a central role in the war on drugs. I think that the war on drugs needs to be transferred to at least to the states, and more so to families and churches and community organizations. The war on drugs needs to be turned into an effort to educate people on drugs and offer treatment for people who have become addicted to various drugs. Of course, people commit crimes in the course of financing their addiction, and those crimes, of course, need to be dealt with. But I'm not in favor of the White House even having a drug czar. And so, for me, Peters' role in the office of the drug czar is actually a negative. John Trinh, he keeps saying, and he said this on his website and in other places as well, lifelong member of the NRA. Wow, that's a strong point. I think that's a very strong point. The fact that he isn't a lifelong member of the NRA, and also the fact that he puts this right out there. I don't know if Joe Peters is a lifelong member or not, but if he is, he's not putting it out there. And so I like John Trinh very much for that. And also his business experience. I think business people make pretty good politicians. I don't know if a politician is right, but they do pretty well in politics, I think, because they bring some kind of a common sense to the political arena in terms of finances. So in the 8th District race, I'm endorsing John Trinh for the candidate to go up against Cartwright in the November election. And let's hope that a Republican can win that election. Now, the weak point for John Trinh is that he currently does not live in the 8th District. And I want to go through an article here in the Scranton Times-Tribune, which talks about that. And he addresses that issue. Let's see how he addresses it. Republican congressional candidate John Trinh pledges to move into the 8th District and thinks where he lives matters far less than what he'll do if elected to represent the district. I think someone's trying to reach me right now. Let's see. Is there someone with an opinion? No, it's not. Okay. Addressing his residency directly for the first time with the Times-Tribune, Trinh, 54, who bought a home last fall in Palmer Township, Northampton County, which is outside the 8th District, said local residents will care more about his stance on economic and other issues. I'm also not naive enough to think there won't be some voters that think this is a big deal, Trinh said. I will find a place that's genuine and authentic in the 8th District. For me, it gives me an opportunity to really go through and think about what would be the right community in terms of, again, what's genuine and authentic, because everything about me is real. Trinh is running for a Republican nomination. Okay, we know that. Trent grew up in Easton and graduated from Easton Area High School in 1981 and Lehigh University in 85. He worked as an investment banker for J.P. Morgan Chase for 15 years and Merrill Lynch for about 5. He and his wife, Maria, bought a home in Short Hills, New Jersey in May 1996. He bought his grandparents' home in Fountain Hill in Lehigh County in 2009 and registered to vote there last June 23rd. When he began running for Congress last year, that home was, and technically still is until January, in the present 15th Congressional District, outside the present 17th Congressional District, whose congressman is Cartwright. So in November, because he wanted to run against Cartwright, the Trins bought the Palmer Township home, which is in the 17th District. Chin thought the 17th would still exist next year and registered to vote at his new home in January. So his intention was to go up against Matthew Cartwright from the beginning. and so he bought this home in Cartwright's congressional district. But then the Supreme Court changed the lines. People said, Chin said he bought the home because he heard the criticism that he did not live in the 17th district. People said, you know what, you really should move into the district because it's silly. This is going to be a close election in the general election, so don't have something that, even if it's only 2 or 3% of the voters, they're going to look at it and say it's an issue. He looked at properties in Schuylkill, Carbon, and Northampton counties, and ultimately found something that was genuine. He said Easton Area High School, where he graduated, is in Palmer Township. After all that, he found out the new home suddenly would no longer be in the 17th District. In February, the state Supreme Court ruled the boundaries of the present congressional districts unconstitutional and eventually drew a new map to take effect next year. The new map put Cartwright's home in a redrawn and renumbered 8th District, but not Trin's home. His home would now be in a new 7th District. So it's very complicated. This is, Pennsylvania Supreme Court really made life complicated for us, but I hope you're following this. The 8th includes all of Lackawanna, Wayne, and Pike counties, most of Luzerne County, including its cities and parts of Monroe County. I will find something in the 8th District, Chin said, and I think it's unreasonable for someone to say, well, John, you're not in the district. The lines just changed a few weeks ago. The U.S. Constitution only requires members of Congress to live in the state they represent, but says nothing about living in a congressional district. Neither the Pennsylvania Constitution nor state law require living in a district either, though some other states have a district residency requirement. However, politically, a candidate who lives outside a district has a tougher road to victory. I have more Pennsylvania in me than most people will ever have, Trent said. I worked in New York for a 20-plus year period, but I was always coming back on the weekends. My stepfather, my brother, my mother, other family members had a long history here. Trent could have run in the 7th District, an open seat because U.S. Representative Charlie Dent, who lives in the 7th, is retiring. Though he grew up in a home in the 7th, Trent said he feels a close affinity to the 8th because of family connections to it. Trent pointed out his great-grandparents were Irish immigrants named Manley who settled in Lackawanna County. He has occasionally vacationed in Monroe County, and while in college worked for the Roadway Trucking Company in Monroe County. In that job, he was a member of the Teamsters Union in Scranton. I learned to hike and fish in Pike County, he said. There was never a nanosecond of doubt in my mind where the right place to run was, because this is an area of the country that needs an advocate for them to fight for their values. That's going to fight for economic growth and prosperity. He called the residency a non-issue. And what gave me the confidence to say that the 8th District is the right place to run is it's more about the person and the values that they have rather than the address. Lines change. People don't. Trent said he is living in the Fountain Hill home while the Palmer Township home undergoes renovations. His wife and daughters remain in New Jersey until both daughters finish high school, but his wife will join him in Pennsylvania eventually, he said. Conigal said Trent meets the constitutional residency requirement and doesn't see residency as a major campaign issue. I think his Wall Street background is an issue, Conigal said. I think it would be nice if he would have lived in the state. He's lived out of the state most of his life. Peters, who reestablished a Scranton residence at his father's home and registering to vote there after years of living at a Wyoming County home outside the district, said he felt moving was important to show his commitment to the district. He declined to comment on Trent's residency. So that's the answer that John Trinh has to the residency issue. And to me as well, the residency is not a big thing. It would be, I hope he does move into the district. I think that would be the right thing to do. And if he wins the Republican primary, I hope he does it before the November election, if he can. But, he'll take his time on that. But as he says, I'm more interested in being represented by a person who shares my values, and especially on the Second Amendment. And John Trinh is a lifetime member of the NRA, and I would like to be represented by a lifetime member of the NRA. That's much more important to me than where his home is located. It would be better if he moved into the district. That would be even better. And I think it's right. There are some people who will look at that and say, that's a problem for me. So, take that problem off the table. Move into the district. But even if he doesn't, I'm still endorsing John Trinh, because I want to be represented by a lifetime member of the NRA. The Wall Street background, again, right now, I think this year our Second Amendment rights are at risk, and we need people who will fight hard for our Second Amendment rights. The Democrats are trying to do everything they can to get gun control legislation passed. We need people in the Congress who will fight against that. So let's have John Trinh, a lifetime member of the NRA, representing us in the 8th District. All right, so that's that one. And then the next race is senator in the General Assembly, the 20th District. This is the Pennsylvania General Assembly senator. And Lisa Baker is our senator right now, and I'm wholeheartedly endorsing her. She is running unopposed, and I think for a good reason. She's a great senator. I attended a speech that she made here in Newfoundland at the elementary school near here. This was in November on Veterans Day, actually. It was the Veterans Day ceremony, and she came and spoke and gave a wonderful speech on veterans and on Second Amendment rights. And I'm extremely comfortable in representing and endorsing her for re-election as senator of this area. And then representative in the General Assembly. So this is the Pennsylvania legislature has two houses, just like the federal Congress, and it has the Senate, and then it has the House of Representatives, and Mike Pfeiffer is our representative there, and he's running unopposed for re-election. And again, he's done a good job, and I think he deserves to be endorsed and to be re-elected. Okay, and then then we have a couple of interesting elections here. One is a member of the Republican State Committee. And it says, for your term, vote for not more than two, one male and one female. So we have to vote for two people, and one of the people we vote for has to be a man, and the other one has to be a woman. I can see this is going to cause all kinds of problems in the future if this whole, gender thing comes to Pennsylvania elections, and we have, 76 genders or 125 or genders or whatever, and then they decide that I can see how this can really become a problem. Anyway, let's stay focused. And we have two candidates here, both of whom are from Milford Township, and both of whom have the last name Forbes. Are they married? Are they father and daughter? Are they son and mother? Are they cousins? I don't know. I tried to find information on these people, Harry Forbes and Julie Forbes. I looked up their names on Facebook and so forth, and I tried to find articles on them, and I didn't come up with anything. I have no idea who these people are. And that, I don't like that. Obviously, some powers that be have decided that these are the two people who are going to represent Pike County in the Republican State Committee, and so they're running unopposed. One has a male type name, and one has a female type name. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write in my own candidates. Someone here. I'm going to write in some people here. I'm going to use the blank lines down there. I haven't decided who I'm going to write in yet, but I'll pick someone that probably someone from our sanctuary congregation here. But Harry and Julie, I wish I knew who you were. And then we have county committee person at large, 4-year term, vote for not more than 6, but there are only 4 candidates. Chris Brighton, Kelly Gaughan, Penny Lures, and Kevin Stroyan. Again, these people, I don't know who they are. So I'm going to write in 6 names, people that I know. And county committee person, 4-year term, vote for not more than 8. But there are only 2, 4, 5 candidates. John Gilpin, Deborah Gunnip, Gary Carlton, Heather Reichman, and Barbara J. Gilpin. Well, the Gilpin name is pretty famous here in Pike County. They're kind of one of the power families of this county, both in Pike and Wayne. But in this case too, I haven't yet decided who I'm going to vote for, and probably I will wind up writing in people's names here as well. I'd much rather vote for someone that I know than someone that I don't. Now, what happened? What was it, last year? Was it? I think yes, it was last year. I went to vote, and as I was going into the polling station, we all go to the United Methodist Church on Hemlock Road, or Romerville Road. We go to Hemlock. It's called the Hemlock United Methodist Church, but it's on Romerville Road. And as I was parked my car and about to go into the building, I saw someone handing out flyers, and it turns out that he was a write-in candidate. He was asking people to write his name in, and that impressed me. So I talked to him for a little bit, and I decided to write his name in. So if there's someone who's doing that kind of thing outside the polling place, asking people to write in their name, then I might make my choice at that time. But otherwise, I'm going to decide before I go to the polling station whose names I'm going to write in for that office. And since only 5 people are running for 8 seats, it's possible that the person that I write in could get one of those extra 3 seats. Seat number 6 or 7 or 8. Yeah, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be very interesting. I hope I don't surprise someone. I say, hey, guess what? You've been elected. What? I didn't know I was running. That could happen. That could happen if I write their name in. All right, let's take a break now, and we'll come back with our Rhema, and then we'll start going through the regular news after this. Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 28th, 2018. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Chanuk, Hyung Moon. Let's go now to the headlines on Drudge. The upper left, as you might imagine, is now focusing on the expected summit conference between President Trump and North Korean dictator, bloodthirsty dictator, and overall terrible person, Kim Jong-un. Trump rebrands diplomatic norms as global events spin on his axis, is the first article that Drudge has. And Kim meeting should be quite something. North Korea says summit will be a new milestone. Meanwhile, U.S. flies B-52 bombers over the South China Sea. We'll get into the whole North Korea thing in a minute. Brokaw fights back. Accuser speaks. He's being accused of sexual harassment against a former reporter that worked under him. Now, he's been married apparently since 1962. So he has a very strong marriage. His political views are different from mine, but I certainly respect the fact that has that apparently a very strong marriage. And he's denying those accusations. Then on the left column, we go back to North Korea here. Smiles from Kim. No more war. Yeah. Peace in our time. Oh, where have you heard that before? Okay. Let's get into that a little bit later. The caravan. Central American asylum seekers get legal aid near the border. Yeah, we had an article, was it yesterday or the day before, that the caravan that's been coming up from Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, is now at the border, at the U.S. border. And they said they were going to try and push their way through the border or apply for asylum on Sunday, which would be tomorrow. So anyway, right now they are resting up apparently and getting all sorts of legal advice. But, under international law, asylum seekers are supposed to apply for asylum in the first country that they reach, the first country that they arrive in. So they should be applying for asylum in Mexico, according to international law. Yes. Romaine lettuce outbreak update. That's the E. coli outbreak. 98 people sick in 22 states. Mass firing at Red State. Red State is a conservative site, and CNN is really happy to see this. They have a big article on this. Conservative outlet Red State froze the site on Friday and dismissed many of its writers, it says. Apparently, some of the writers were not pro-Trump enough, according to that article. And Salem is the company that owns that site. They froze it for a while. GMP 2.3%, slowing. Okay. Women guilty of carrying loaded gun in the vagina. We had this an article in this same incident last year. And the update is that she agreed to a plea deal. The gun, you may wonder what type of gun. And says here's seen below. Anyway, it's 5.6 inches long and weighs 13.4 ounces with an empty magazine. But she had a fully loaded clip and a bullet in the chamber. It was a .380 caliber handgun. I'm just, aside from all the sort of yucky and parts, I'm just afraid of what this means. If the TSA gets an idea about becoming even more intrusive in their searches, this is going to be bad. Anyway, I think she has done a disservice to many, 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 many women. Yeah. Hey, let's move on quickly. Blue light from smartphones linked to cancer. Vodka made from San Francisco fog. I'll bet they charge a lot for it, too. Rapid autopsy programs seek clues to cancer within hours of death. Congressman suggests Republicans retiring because of assassination fears. Wow. That's possible. We'll go into that later on. Trump says Russia probe must end now. House panel officially clears the president. Yes, the House panel of House committee that was investigating the president issued a report that cleared him. Wow, yeah. Natalia Vasilitskaya, I am a lawyer. I am an informant. Brennan warns POTUS, as President Trump, stay tuned. Hey, there's more to come. Yeah, Brennan is the former the director of intelligence. He's the sort of the master spy of the United States, or was under Obama, and he is out to get Trump. Cohen loaned millions to Ukrainian cab mogul. Wynn Resorts proposes dropping Wynn. Mag, Kanya is America's last rock star. Poop Song, new track mocks era. And Chance the Rapper turns on Trump. Cornel West, dumbed down music harming the youth. Texas couple enslaved African girl for 16 years, say the feds. Cops chase naked outdoor sex couple through the city. TV show gives people brand new faces in most extreme show on earth. Not funny, judge orders Cosby to remain in his home befitted with a GPS monitor. And world's oldest spider dies at 43 years of age. Saudi Arabia downs another Yemeni missile. Those missiles aren't doing very well, are they? I think Saudi Arabia has been able to shoot down, I think, almost all of them. 3 killed at Gaza border protests, 400 wounded. Remember the residents of Gaza, the Strip, have been going up to the fence that marks the border with Israel and protesting at the fence. Protesting, they want to be able to return to the former Palestinian homelands. In other words, the land that is currently occupied by Israel. Trump Town coming to Jerusalem. ISIS propaganda machine smashed in cyber raid. Cable TV's cord-cutting woes deepen. Took DNA test. You may be a genetic informant. Yeah, these DNA tests, you're giving you send away, your saliva or something, and they, send you back information where your ancestors came from and so forth. But meanwhile, you're voluntarily providing information to some kind of database someplace. I wouldn't do that. Use in serial killer probe sparks privacy concerns. Yeah, should have seen that coming. ABBA records again. Hey. How old are they now, anyway? I think this photograph is probably pretty old. They must be, in their 50s now? Still Have Faith in You, first song in 35 years. Trump aims to block California on fuel economy targets. Crash of 1929. Can it happen again? Of course it can. We still have the Fed. Musk faces Tesla vote as stockholders consider removal. Okay. Let's look at how President Trump is turning the diplomatic norms upside down. This is what we elected him for, to basically take the establishment and turn it upside down. Where is this? LMT Online. Okay. President Donald Trump on Friday placed himself at the center of the remarkable summit between the leaders of North and South Korea, taking credit for bold and innovative diplomacy that may open a path to peace where other leaders failed. Well, I'll give my views, on the whole peace thing, the whole peace in our time thing. That has never worked well, has it? Didn't work with Hitler, and I doubt that's going to work with Kim Jong-un. Peace in our time. It's certainly something that I hope I can do for the world, Trump said. This is beyond the United States. This is a world problem, and it's something that I hope I'm able to do for the world. The dramatic turn of events on the Korean Peninsula was the capstone to a week that crystallized the ways Trump has established his foreign policy approach as one that rests largely on the pride he takes in busting the old conventions of diplomatic negotiations and remaking them in his image. The world is adjusting. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel visited the White House this week, hoping to convince Trump not to abandon the Iran nuclear deal and to back off his protectionist trade policies. But by the time they'd left, both leaders had largely given up trying to convince Trump he was wrong and instead focused on how to work around their differences. British Prime Minister Theresa May, who had been keeping Trump at arm's length in recent months, defied the threat of mass protests this week to finally invite him to visit what is often called America's closest ally. I think actually Japan fits that bill now. Anyway, UK wants that, okay. The Senate confirmed Mike Pompeo, a Trump political ally and former Tea Party congressman, to be Secretary of State, giving the president a foreign policy team more in line with the international policies he promoted during the campaign. Trump's foreign policy maneuvers, particularly on North Korea, carry great risks. Pyongyang has proven an unreliable negotiator in the past. Well, that's putting it mildly. A failure of talks now could inflame tensions back to where they were only months ago, when there were concerns that a military confrontation was becoming more likely. If he abandons the Iran deal, Trump will be under pressure to come up with a new approach to keeping Tehran's nuclear ambitions on check. Okay, I can't stand it anymore. I've got to give it to you now. What's happening in North Korea is this. All right? Of course, I've already said it a few times. Kim Jong-un will discuss denuclearization. Kim Jong-un will commit to denuclearization. Kim Jong-un will sign a agreement that he will denuclearize. Kim Jong-un will come back later and say, guess what, everybody, I've gotten rid of all my nuclear weapons. He will do all of that, but he will not denuclearize. He will not get rid of even a single warhead. All right? And besides, what he means by denuclearization is different from what you and I mean by denuclearization. I mean, you and I agree with President Trump. Denuclearization means that North Korea gets rid of its nuclear weapons. Isn't that what denuclearization means? That's not what Kim Jong-un means. You've got to understand that language is different in communist countries. Language, words like democracy, words like human rights, and words like denuclearization have different meanings. And the agreement that you saw the agreement yesterday morning between North and South Korea. They were not talking about denuclearizing North Korea. They were talking about the agreement was to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, and that is completely different from what you and I have been talking about. What President Trump has been trying to get. Denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula means North Korea will maybe, under certain circumstances, get rid of its weapons. But it also means that North Korea is not under the nuclear umbrella of the United States. That's what North Korea means by denuclearization. That Korea will not be under the nuclear umbrella of the United States. It will not be protected by United States nuclear weapons. That's very different. And the United States is not going to do that. The United States is not going to rip away its protection of the Korean Peninsula. So, this peace in our time thing is just not going to happen. So what will happen, though, is that I predict what will happen is that there will be the North and South said that they're going to sign a peace agreement by the end of the year. They're going to replace the current armistice agreement with a peace agreement by the end of the year. Okay, what will the effect of that be? Well, the effect of that then will be that there will be no more reason for U.S. forces to be stationed in Korea. And maybe this is what President Trump wants. Maybe he's saying, okay, it's time for us to. And he was skeptical of NATO, right? So maybe also he has in mind to pull U.S. forces out of Korea. I think that's very possible. Anyway, if a peace agreement is signed, that will be a natural effect. Now, North Korea has said that it is not insisting on the withdrawal of U.S. troops as a precondition for talks. They don't need to. They don't need to, because the natural consequence of signing a peace agreement will be that the reason for U.S. troops to be in Korea will be erased. There will be no more reason for U.S. troops to be in Korea. So the natural effect, the natural consequence of signing a peace agreement is for U.S. troops to be withdrawn from Korea. Which is interesting because right now the U.S. troops are basically being used by North Korea as a kind of a hostage, saying, oh, if you attack us, we will attack South Korea, and a lot of U.S. troops who are stationed there will die. So don't attack us. So in a sense, this is like we have a hostage situation in a bank, and kind of the hostages are being removed from the bank. And once the hostages are removed, then the SWAT team can go into the bank with full force. And I think that may be what will happen on the Korean Peninsula. Yeah. Once U.S. troops are withdrawn, and it turns out that Kim Jong-un has not gotten rid of any of his nuclear weapons, they still threaten the United States, President Trump will have a much freer hand to strike North Korea militarily. So that is the scenario, that is the script that we're following right now. All right? So none of this peace in our time stuff. We're getting closer to war. We're getting closer to war. We're not moving away. We're getting closer. So anyway, we'll see. And while Trump boasts that his tough trade talk is bringing countries to the negotiating table, Congressional Republicans are openly fretting that potential trade wars will be disastrous for the economy and their party's prospects in the midterm elections. But for now, the president is dismissing his critics as naysayers who have failed where he plans to succeed. We have a kick every once in a while out of the fact that I'll be watching people that failed so badly over the last 25 years explaining to me how to make a deal with North Korea, Trump cracked during a White House news conference Friday with Merkel. I get a big kick out of that. Trump has turned the traditional step-by-step process of major international negotiations on its head. He stunned some aides by agreeing on the spot to an offer of direct talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The meeting casts Trump as the iconoclastic deal-maker in chief, and he appears to relish the image. The United States in the past was played like a fiddle by North Korea because Pyongyang could take advantage of a different kind of leader, Trump said Friday, and that's not happening to us. Hours before, Kim had walked across the border to South Korea and a waiting embrace from South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Over an hours-long visit across the heavily armed border, Kim said the foundations for a meeting with Trump, which is expected to occur as soon as next month. Well, actually, Trump now is saying June, early June. But maybe as soon as next month. Yeah. Kim has agreed that denuclearization will be on the table. See, it'll be on the table, yeah. He'll discuss it. He'll agree to it. He'll sign a paper saying that he'll do it. But he won't. At least not the kind of denuclearization that you and I are talking about. Trump claims he has forced the issue through his tough stance on North Korea during his first years in office and vowed that he will be a sharper negotiator than any of his predecessors. And also, North Korea is coming into this as a victor, all right? As a victor. He's not waving the white flag. Moon Jae-in is his guy. Moon Jae-in is a leftist. Moon Jae-in has people on his staff who believe that South Korea should come under Juche ideology. Trump also credits the personal bond he forged with Chinese President Xi Jinping for fostering the rapid turnabout with North Korea, China's communist ally and economic lifeline. Everyone's surprised at how tight he clamped down on North Korea, Trump said. Everyone said that he'd just talk about it, he wouldn't do it. Well, he did it, and he did it out of a relationship that we have. China does things, out of its own interest. China is not a country that is going to do something like, clamping down on North Korea out of a relationship that it has with the President of the United States. But China saw how North Korea's economic program was advancing, and realized that the time was coming when these nuclear weapons in North Korea could threaten China just as easily as America and Japan. So that's why China started to really clamp down on North Korea. Trump also took credit for helping South Korea open the door for talks through his support for the Winter Olympics held there in February. With Trump's blessing, South Korea invited North Korea to send athletes and dignitaries, transforming the Games into a spectacular spectacle of sports diplomacy after nearly 70 years of conflict and hostility between the two Koreas. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, a frequent critic of Trump on foreign policy matters, sounded excited about the reversal on the Korean Peninsula after months of Twitter taunts and name-calling between Trump and Kim. We're not there yet, but if this happens, President Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, Graham said Friday. Let's wait a bit on that, all right? In the first place, the Nobel Peace Prize is so political that I don't know why anyone would want to receive it. Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize and then went on to start 7 wars. They're not going to give a Republican president a Nobel Peace Prize even if he stops 7 wars because they're so political. But anyway, Mr. Graham, let's control ourselves. Merkel's cordial afternoon visit Friday was brief by comparison with the 3 days of frills accorded Macron earlier in the week. Merkel came to make a final argument to Trump that he should not break the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran ahead of a May 12th deadline. Macron had already suggested that his own diplomacy had failed to sway Trump away from his opposition to what the president calls a bad deal. Merkel was also making a practical argument for exempting Europe from new tariffs on steel and aluminum that would take effect on May 1. Trump's reasons for the tariffs are, like his views on the Iran deal, rooted in his populist worldview. The America First campaign slogan put in action no matter the horrified complaints of allies and some in Trump's own party. That traditional allies had to come to him asking for a change of heart on issues where the United States and Europe once walked in step shows the ways in which Trump has rewritten the rules. The president will decide. That is very clear, Merkel said. We had an exchange of views on the current state of affairs of the negotiations and the respective assessments on where we stand on this, and the decision lies with the president. Merkel leads Europe's most populous country and is the longest-serving leader among the major European powers, a mainstay of the kind of cautious consensus politics Trump instinctively rejects. But more than a year after their awkward first White House meeting dominated by Trump's pet peeve about German contributions to NATO that he considers paltry, Merkel seemed to have the hang of navigating policy disagreements with an American leader she must nonetheless court. On Iran, she told Trump that in her view, the current deal is anything but perfect, but she avoided any point-by-point examination of their differences. Trump smiled as he moved to a discussion of NATO that addressed Trump's complaint that the United States pays too much in terms that he might have chosen himself. Germany and Europe have taken their destiny into their own hands because we can no longer, as we used to during the period of the Cold War, during the years when Germany was divided, rely on America coming to help us, Merkel said. Trump, who is broadly unpopular in Germany, shrugged off a German reporter's question about his aggressive tweeting and blunt diplomatic style. I believe that, when I look at the numbers in Germany and some other countries, they may not like Donald Trump, but you have to understand that that means I'm doing a good job because I'm representing the United States, he said. Yeah, okay, well, go Trump. So, yes, that's basically what we were hoping to see from Trump when we voted for him, that he would be iconoclastic, that he would go in there, and just sort of create some level of chaos and let pieces fall where they would, and then pick pieces up and put something together out of that chaos. And I think that's what he's doing. North Korea situation, I don't want war, but if you really want to denuclearize North Korea, the only way to do it is regime change. And the only way that is going to happen is unless China does something, unless China goes in with some kind of a operation, it has to be done militarily by the United States. This is what President Trump told Xi Jinping last year in Mar-a-Lago. just over a year ago. North Korea, that is a problem that we want you to take care of. We want you, China, to take care of. But if you don't, if you cannot or will not take care of that, then we will. And we're in the we will stage now. We're in that stage. China still has an opportunity. They still have an opportunity. And I think what I would like to see China do, if China were to come to me and ask me what they should do, I would say, hey, listen, use whatever resources you have, whatever assets you have in North Korea to stage a coup d'etat. Yes, to stage a coup d'etat in North Korea and replace the current leadership, not just Kim Jong-un, but also the military leadership and the party leadership with people who are more reasonable. But if they did that, then that would mean that this new leadership would be basically extremely loyal to China. It would be a puppet regime. And the one thing that North Korea has not had over the years is a puppet regime. Kim Il-sung was very good at playing China and Russia or Soviet Union off against each other. Kim Jong-il as well. And Kim Jong-un, of course, executed Chang Song-taek, his uncle, because he was too close to China. Chang Song-taek had become China's main guy, go-to guy in North Korea. And he was also the number 2 most powerful person in North Korea. And so with Chang Song-taek, China had quite a bit of influence in North Korea. But Kim Jong-un at one point basically just to sort of cut the umbilical cord, you might say, by executing Chang Song-taek. And so, right now North Korea is kind of like a kite that's flying without a string. You don't know where it's going to go. It could, fall anywhere. So if the Korean Peninsula is going to be reunited, and I think it will be, most likely it will be reunited by American military force. Next year or the year after. Yeah, next year or the year after. 2019 or 2020. A lot of people will die. And that's a tremendous tragedy. But that's the way I see the Korean Peninsula going. All right, let's look at this second article under the Korea thing in the upper left here. Korea meeting should be quite something. President Trump saying that. The latest on President Donald Trump and the meeting between the leaders of North and South Korea, all times local. This is yesterday evening. President Trump says he is looking forward to a meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, saying it should be quite something. Trump spoke at a press conference with German Chancellor Angela Merkel Friday. He congratulated the leaders of North and South after a historic summit. And his meeting with Kim will happen in the coming weeks. So forth, so forth. All right. You know what? Let's take a break now, and we'll come back with our Rhemas. How about that? Yeah, let's do that.
that fun shooting this Tommy gun today?
It's always fun shooting Tommy guns. This one especially. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
All polished and chromed up. It really looks like $1 million.
Yeah, yeah. Elliot Ness would have loved one of those.
Yeah, and it's available right now in your favorite dealer, and you go pick one up.
Yeah, just have him call your distributor.
I mean, the gun, you know, was initially made way back when, back in the 27 is this one.
Yeah, model 27.
I was surprised by how quick it knocked down those plates.
Oh, 3.5 second run, under 3.5 second run, knocking down a plate right. 341.
I mean, the gun is heavy. It's about what, 12, 14 pounds, especially with this drum. But it's surprising how quick you can go with it. It would actually make quite a good self-defense rifle at home.
If I climbed in somebody's window and they were aiming that at me, I think I'd get out of there real quick. So
that sounds about right to me.
Just the intimidation factor alone.
Fire!
Welcome back to the King's Report for April 28th, 2018. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Hyung Jin Moon. And in my Bible Rhema this morning, I'm in John chapter 21. In this chapter, Jesus has been crucified, dead, buried, resurrected. And in chapter 20, the chapter immediately before this, he appears to his disciples in the upper room, and so forth, and also in the whole thing with doubting Thomas. Thomas says, let me touch you, and Jesus says, yeah, go ahead. And then Thomas falls down and says, my God. Anyway, he recognizes, he believes in Jesus at that time. My Lord and my God, he says in verse 28 of chapter 20. Anyway, I'm in the next chapter 21, and I'm in verse 7 here. Therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved, and that's probably John, saith unto Peter, it is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. So here, an interesting thing happens. That is, after Jesus is crucified, he's resurrected. He comes back, and he's he's on the earth for 40 days, and then there's the ascension. And we need to ask ourselves, why did Jesus come back in that way? What was his purpose in returning, in being resurrected? Now, Christianity over the centuries and millennia has pointed to the resurrection as proof that Jesus is the Messiah. and even today, when I speak with Christians, I find that this is their cornerstone. And we've seen a couple of Christian movies over the past year or so, and these movies are about atheists trying to prove the resurrection to be wrong, but a Christian comes and proves it to be right, and therefore Jesus is the Christ, he's the Messiah. But I think that is the wrong way to go about this whole question of Jesus being the Messiah. What if the tomb had not been empty? Would Jesus not be the Messiah then? If his body were still there, would he not be the Messiah? Well, that's not the case. Jesus was the Messiah not because he's resurrected. Jesus was the Messiah because God sent him to be the Messiah. He was the Word incarnate. He was holy man and holy God, fully man and fully God. And he was the second Adam. So the fact that he's resurrected did not make him the Messiah. The Christians may say, okay, but it's proof that it's evidence that he was Messiah. Well, again, I would say no, because it was not necessary for him to be. It was not necessary for the tomb to be empty. Now, in truth, I believe Father says that Jesus' body, his physical body, Jesus' physical body, the dead physical body, was taken from the tomb by someone who respected Jesus and wanted to move it to a secret place where it would not be disturbed, it would not be desecrated. So even if the tomb had a physical body there when the women went there, even if Jesus and his spirit self could have appeared and would have appeared to the disciples and to the women that were following him. So his resurrection is completely an independent issue from whether or not the tomb was empty. Christians say, well, he resurrected physically, and that the whole doubting Thomas thing, where Thomas asked to touch him, and Jesus said, "Go ahead," proves that this was a physical resurrection of Jesus' body. That the dead body, Jesus, he was lying there, he was dead, but all of a sudden he just woke up and walked away. But in the first place, Thomas actually here in the book of John, does not actually touch Jesus. Jesus says to Thomas, "Then saith he to Thomas, Reach here thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. And Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God." So Jesus challenged Thomas to touch him, but Thomas actually, without touching him, did that. And Jesus saith unto him, "Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed." So Jesus did not say, "Because thou hast touched me, thou hast believed." He said, "Because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed." All right. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed. So, anyway, so the Christians want to say that the resurrection was a physical resurrection, and they go through all sorts of proofs of how he could have survived the crucifixion and so forth, or that the body could have been resurrected. But if that's true, then what about the ascension? Was the ascension a physical ascension? I think that's where their logic really fails. And they cannot answer that point without referring to True Father's teaching. True Father's teaching is that there is a physical self and a spirit self. These are two separate things. and that death marks the time when the spirit self leaves the physical self and goes into the spirit world. And Jesus' resurrection was the resurrection of his spirit self, which is invisible to the fallen eye, but substantial. It is also substantial, so that even if Thomas had touched him, he would have felt something substantial, because Thomas's spiritual senses were opened by the grace of God at that time. He could see Jesus by the grace of God, and if he had touched him, he could have touched Jesus also substantially by the grace of God. His spiritual senses. We have 5 spiritual senses in addition to our 5 physical senses. So anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track here because I'm talking more about chapter 20 than I am about 21. Let's get to 21. So after all that, what did the disciples do? After Jesus had appeared to them, and after even Thomas had been challenged to touch Jesus, and he says, "My Lord, my God," they went back to their daily lives. So Peter here is fishing. And this is why Jesus had to be resurrected. That is why he had to come back. Because if he hadn't come back, then his disciples, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times before the cock crowed, and Judas, of course, had sold him out and later would commit suicide. So basically, the structure or the following that Jesus had created prior to the crucifixion was scattered. His 12 disciples were just, going back to their former lives, and nothing was continuing. And Jesus couldn't just go to the spirit world that way. He had to leave a foundation on earth, some kind of foundation, even a spiritual foundation. And he didn't have a son who was also his disciple. So he had to rely on Peter, who was not his direct descendant, not his actual son, but a disciple and his spiritual son. So he resurrected in order to gather the disciples and basically to give them their marching orders and to give them the certainty of faith that he was the Messiah, that he was who he said he was. Because, even at the time of the crucifixion, they were not sure. I think if they had been sure, Peter could have testified to Jesus at that time. They said, when people said, "Hey, I saw you with this rebel, with this Jesus figure," Peter could have said, "Yeah, that's right. And you know what? I'm here to testify that he is the Messiah that we, the Jewish people, have been waiting for 4,000 years. He is the Messiah, and I'm here to testify to that fact. And we need to accept him." And maybe Peter would have been crucified alongside Jesus then. Well, I think that would have been better. That would have been better for Peter and for the world. And I think the history of Christianity would have been quite different if Peter could have done that. But he couldn't. I'm not, maybe if I had been in that position, probably I wouldn't have been able to either. I mean, my ancestors were off in some cave someplace, eating raw meat or something, I suppose. But, the people that God had prepared as the central figures of his providence, even after 4,000 years of preparation and training, could not testify to Jesus. So most likely, my ancestors probably would have killed Jesus rather than testify to him. So I'm not trying to say that I'm not trying to put down Peter or try to say that I would have done better in that position. But anyway, that was the situation, that Jesus, after the crucifixion, had no foundation. And so he had to come back, and he had to gather his disciples, and he had to encourage them, and he had to give them the courage that they would need in order to fulfill their mission, because they were going to go the same path that he was. Everyone except for John was somehow tortured and killed in gruesome ways. And so Jesus needed to do that, to make that preparation. And that is why the resurrection occurred. So people ask, why didn't Reverend Sung Myung Moon resurrect, to prove that he is the Messiah? Well, he didn't need to, because our true father, Reverend Sung Myung Moon, the true parent, has a son who is also his disciple, a direct son who is also his disciple. And that is our second king, Hyung Jin Moon. And so Father is able to work with him, and he is able to use the second king as that rallying point for people to follow, to unite around. And the second king has performed that function, that role, exceptionally well. More and more people are gathering now as he testifies to Father, testifying to Father. And that is the most important thing that we do today. Here in verse 7, the disciples whom Jesus loved, the disciple whom Jesus loved saith unto Peter, so John, that is, said to Peter, It is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girt his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. So he was embarrassed, suddenly finding himself in the presence of Jesus. And let's read a little bit further. And the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from the land, but as it were 200 cubits, dragging the net with them, with fishes. And then as they were come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. Jesus said unto him, Bring the fish which ye have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes, 153. And for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. Jesus saith unto them, Come and dine. And none of the disciples durst ask him, Who art thou? Knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus then cometh and taketh bread, and giveth them, and fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus showed himself to his disciples. After that, he was risen from the dead. So Jesus gathered his disciples together, and so that they could go forward and spread the word throughout the world. But Jesus' gospel was the gospel of the kingdom, and the crucifixion and resurrection were such dramatic events that it seems though that the disciples, when they spread Jesus' teachings, focused on those dramatic events rather than saying that Jesus had come to establish the kingdom. You know, in the Gospels, fortunately, when the Gospels were written by various people, this aspect of the kingdom was preserved, and we have it today. And we have clearly, as the second king has demonstrated many, many times, we have clearly that Jesus defined his own gospel as the gospel of the kingdom. And I think it took the disciples some time, though, to really figure out what Jesus was really trying to do. They were with him a short time, about 3 years, less than 3 years probably. And imagine, I've been here, in Newfoundland 4 years almost. So 3 years with Jesus would have been a very, very short time, especially for a group of people who were not the how shall we say, the A-team that God had prepared. God had hoped that people like John the Baptist and the Jewish establishment, religious leaders would be the ones who would receive Jesus and would testify to him, and they could have understood Jesus much better because they knew the Old Testament. They knew the Scriptures much better than the 12 disciples. We see a couple of places where people would ask the disciples questions about relating to Jesus' mission and the Scripture, and the disciples wouldn't know what they were talking about, and so they have to go to Jesus and ask him, this is the question I received. What's this all about? So the disciples didn't know the Scriptures so well, and so they were not the A team, so to speak. They were a B or C or D or T, something other team. But they needed kind of extracurricular classes, I guess you'd say, or after school classes, and that's basically, I think, what the resurrection was. those 40 days after the crucifixion, kind of after school class where after 3 years, then Jesus came back from the dead and taught his disciples for an extra 40 days so that they could finally begin to get some inkling that they were onto something extremely important. All right, I want to go now to my Rhema in the Cheonseongyung, and I'm in the book on our life in the spirit world, and chapter 1, on page 812. When human beings register into the heavenly spirit world, here we have the word register again. Register. We just had the Book of Life registration, a holy blessing ceremony, right? Ibjok is the Korean word, ibjok, and I explained previously in a Sunday service about that word. You can look up that sermon. So when human beings register into the heavenly spirit world, they should take with them a certificate that confirms the details of their life on earth. I am talking about a certificate of your entire life with which you can say, this is how I lived, this is what I did. But you are not the one who writes this kind of certificate. You don't get to write the certificate on your own. This is not an autobiography that you take there. Satan should first write it for you. So Satan's going to write it for you. You should first receive the certificate from Satan and then receive Jesus' certificate. Then you should receive God's certificate. These words spoken in 1999 from our True Father. In other areas, other places, Father talks about getting a passport, and he says, or you get your passport stamped. I think he said, and the first stamp has to come from Satan. The second stamp comes from Jesus, and then God can accept you into the kingdom of heaven, or something like that. We first have to deal with first deal with Satan. And there is a daily battle that we engage in against Satan, of course, the Satan within ourselves. Daily, we are battling our own sin. And the weapon that we use to battle our sin is the Word of God. And that is why it is so important to arm ourselves each morning with the Word of God, both from the Bible and from the Cheonseongyung, so that we can live this day in the grace of God. Oh, thank you, Heavenly Father, for these words. All right, let's take a break, and we'll come back with more news from a Cheonseongyuk perspective.
To the least of these, boys become kings, girls will be
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 28th, 2017. No, actually, it's 2018. 2018, I'm sorry. And I don't know why I said that. Somehow my mind went back in a time machine, I suppose, to a year ago. But it is 2018, and we have a midterm election coming up this year. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyung Moon, and I want to go into this article about the GOP-led House Intelligence Committee clearing Trump in this investigation into Russia collusion. The Republican-led House Intelligence Committee on Friday released a lengthy report concluding it found no evidence that Donald Trump's campaign colluded with Russia in the 2016 presidential campaign, drawing praise from the president and rebuttals from Democrats. The report caps an investigation that began with the promise of bipartisanship, but quickly transformed into an acrimonious battle between Democrats and Republicans over Russia's meddling in the 2016 election and whether there were any connections with the Trump campaign. Trump quickly claimed vindication Friday, calling the report totally conclusive, strong, powerful, many things. No collusion, which I knew anyway. No coordination, no nothing. It's a witch hunt. That's all it is, he told reporters in the Oval Office. But the committee's Republicans didn't let the Trump campaign completely off the hook. They specifically cited the Trump campaign for poor judgment in taking a June 2016 meeting in Trump Tower that was described in emails to Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., as part of a Russian government effort to aid his father's presidential bid. The reporter also dubbed the campaign's praise of WikiLeaks objectionable. While the committee found no evidence that the Trump campaign colluded, coordinated, or conspired with the Russian government, the investigation did find poor judgment and ill-considered actions by the Trump and Clinton campaigns, the House Intelligence Committee wrote. The House investigation is the first of several inquiries probing Russian election interference to conclude. A separate investigation led by Special Counsel Robert Mueller continues, as do probes led by the Senate Intelligence and Judiciary Committees. In a Friday night tweet, Trump repeated his witch hunt claim and wrote, "There should never have been a special counsel appointed." The House report's conclusion is fiercely opposed by committee Democrats who accused their Republican colleagues of playing defense counsel for the White House throughout the investigation. Committee Republicans chose not to seriously investigate or even see, when in plain sight, evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Representative Adam Schiff of California, the top Democrat on the committee, said in a statement. Schiff cited several secret meetings and communication between people linked to Russia and Trump campaign officials, including Trump Jr. and former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Schiff called on the committee to publicly release the transcripts from dozens of interviews with key witnesses, saying the public should be able to judge the evidence gathered by the committee. Democrats also released a 98-page rebuttal. Representative Mike Conaway, Republican of Texas, meanwhile called on intelligence officials to clear the committee to release more information from the report that was deemed classified. The 253-page document is packed with details and assessments, but is also spackled with redacted names and blacked-out passages. For instance, several pages are redacted in the section on Russian cyber attacks. One page is blacked out entirely, except for a line reading, "Attribution is a bear." The report faults intelligence officials during the Obama administration for not telling the Trump campaign that some of its members were potentially counterintelligence concerns. It specifically cites Flynn, former Trump campaign foreign policy advisors George Papadopoulos, and Carter Page, and former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. The panel also singles out Manafort for criticism, saying the numerous criminal charges he faces unrelated to Russia illustrated the need for better vetting by the campaign. If the accusations against Manafort are true, he should never have served as a senior official with a campaign for the U.S. presidency, much less campaign chairman or manager, the report said. Manafort has denied any wrongdoing. The report largely confirms the findings of U.S. intelligence agencies that Russia was assessed to be responsible for cyber attacks on U.S. political institutions, including the hack of the Democratic National Committee's emails. The panel found no credible evidence that the computer systems were compromised by another cyber actor or by an insider threat. The panel also found that Russians leveraged social media in the U.S. to sow discord during the campaign. The report challenges one part of a January 2017 intelligence assessment that found that Russian meddling was an effort to help Trump. The report says committee staff found intelligence failings that undermined that assessment by FBI, CIA, and NSA. Those specifics are not detailed, and some portions of that section are redacted. Last month, in response to the committee announcing that finding, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence said it stood by the intelligence community's findings and will review the community's report. The House investigation began with bipartisan promise, but ultimately succumbed to factional squabbling. But the probe did provide important public revelations. Former FBI Director James Comey chose in March 20th, 2017 hearing of the House Intelligence Committee to publicly reveal that the FBI had been investigating the Trump campaign since July 2016. On one day later, the committee's chairman, Devin Nunes, took a clandestine trip to the White House grounds to review classified information that quickly drew scrutiny after he publicly disclosed that Trump's associates' communications had been swept up by the U.S. spy agency and accused Obama administration officials of misconduct. The episode drew questions about whether Nunes was coordinating with the White House and ultimately led to his recusing from the probe amid an ethics investigation into whether he mishandled classified information. In his absence, Conaway took over the probe. Nunes was eventually cleared of wrongdoing but never formally rejoined the House investigation. Instead, he launched a pair of investigations on his own, taking aim at the Justice Department and FBI. At the start of 2018, Nunes and the committee's Republican staff crafted a memo revealing details of the FBI's surveillance of the former Trump campaign aide Carter Page. Trump ultimately chose to declassify the sensitive contents of the memo, including details from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act application for Page. House investigators cautioned that Russia will continue meddling in U.S. elections and suggested some fixes that would help the government and politicians better defend against that interference. The panel wrote that intelligence officials should immediately alert presidential candidates and Congress when they discover legitimate threats to a campaign. The panel also recommended the executive branch crack down on leaks by conducting polygraphs. Under the Congressional Constitution, this kind of a problem would be substantially, very significantly mitigated and maybe eliminated. The problem here is that you have the influence of social media, the influence of media in general, which is not a neutral actor, and also so you have a foreign power acting through that media. But if you have the president elected by the House of Representatives, as you do in the Congressional Constitution, in a very short period of time, right now in the United States, I mean, the next presidential election is more than 3 years away, 3.5 years away. Already people are starting to go to Iowa, Iowa being the, sort of the first stop on the primary trail, basically, Iowa and New Hampshire. And already the people are, the mayor of Los Angeles, for example, and others are starting, sort of feelers to see whether they should run for president or not. And so what you have now is a perpetual campaign, basically, perpetual campaign. And politicians don't have time to do the jobs that we elect them for because they're always campaigning. But in the Chinese Constitution, you have a situation where anyone who has 10 votes in the House of Representatives is automatically considered to be a candidate. And then you have the first round of voting, and then at the second round, then the top seven people go to the second round, assuming that no one gets 50% on the first round, and then you drop one person each round until someone gets 50%. And these rounds of voting have to continue. You cannot take a break for a few days or a few months and a few weeks and come back. No, this has to continue until you have a winner. So because the whole process is condensed, there's much less opportunity for any kind of foreign meddling, for one thing, either by foreign countries or by corporations or by media, because it goes boom, 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 and you're done. And yeah, we got a president. and also because the members of the House each represent a population of 2,100, they are much closer to their people, and they're much more in tune with the values and the preferences of their constituents. So the way to prevent this kind of a problem, if it is a problem, is to adopt the Cheongguk Constitution. One more reason to do that. All right, so President Trump is calling it a victory. Congratulations. Of course, we always knew that he was innocent, but it's good to have at least the House Intelligence Committee confirming that. Let's go to another story now on how Republicans are retiring because of assassination fears. Remember, there was a Democrat who fired a weapon at Republicans who were playing a baseball game, and apparently many of the people who were on that baseball team are retiring. Alabama Republican Mo Brooks suggested in a radio interview that Republicans are retiring en masse because of assassination fears. Brooks was speaking on the Dale Jackson Show about the first Republican practice, the Congressional baseball game, after last year's shooting that left Majority Whip Steve Scalise severely injured. We have multiple rings of security, plainclothes, uniform, Capitol Police, other police, he said. There was a medical vehicle nearby just in case there was a copycat. But Brooks said while there were multiple factors that contributed to a slew of Republicans leaving the House, he suggested fear of violence was a major one. One of the things that's concerning me is the assassination risk may become a factor, he said. Brooks referred to the fact many members of the Republican baseball team are retiring, including Senator Jeff Flake, Representatives Ryan Costello, Pat Meehan, Dennis Ross, and Tom Rooney. You have to wonder, with that kind of disproportionate retirement number, whether what happened in June played a factor, he said. Brooks also pointed to the fact that in the past month, a man pled guilty to threatening Arizona Republican Martha McSally, and 3 different people have been arrested for threatening Representatives Scott Taylor and Tom Garrett of Virginia and Frank Lobiondo of New Jersey. Notice a trend here, he said. I have a congressman who is a friend here who has a 13-year-old daughter whose daughter was threatened with murder. He also said the socialist Bernie Sanders wing of society was pushing for a revolution that would lead to Maoist level of violence. There are a growing number of leftists who believe the way to resolve this is not at the ballot box, but through threats and sometimes through violence and assassinations, he said. When pressed about his suggestion, Brooks said it was a possible factor. I don't think any of these people who are retiring would say that, but just looking at the numbers, he said, that's out of whack. Well, he may be onto something. The liberal left, illiberal left, if they can't win at the ballot box, they will resort to violence. And we've seen this from the illiberal left over the past year and a half many, many times. Madonna, on or around about the Inauguration Day last year, getting up on stage with a microphone and saying, yes, I've thought many, many times about blowing up the White House. And that was only the beginning. And, these late-night comedians fomenting an atmosphere of violence against Republicans, against the president specifically, and Republicans in general. Yes, it takes courage these days to be a Republican, especially in a democratic city like Washington, D.C. And I can understand people's concerns. Under the Cheongguk Constitution, the House of Representatives will most likely not meet in a particular location, although it may, but most likely will not, because there will be so many in number that it will have some kind of an online system of voting and debating. So that would also significantly mitigate this issue here of safety, because people could do their work in Congress from the safety of their own constituency where people support them. It would be much more difficult for the these crazies to get at them. Also, because there are so many, killing one or two isn't going to make that much of a difference. So again, another reason to adopt the Cheongguk Constitution. Well, let's see what else is in the news. The Central American Asylum Seekers, this caravan that is now on the border near Tijuana, wants to get into the United States. Let's see, I think the last we read it was Sunday. Let's see if anything has changed. About 20 volunteer U.S. lawyers gave legal workshops Friday just across the border in Mexico to Central American asylum seekers who traveled in a caravan that has been harshly criticized by President Donald Trump. Well, I hope as part of that legal advice, they inform these people that they should be applying for asylum in Mexico because that is the first country of their arrival. Journalists who were not allowed inside the sessions for about 300 migrants that took place at a civic group's office at Tijuana's largest migrant shelter and at an art gallery in a building that once housed a cross-border tunnel used to smuggle drugs into San Diego. The lawyers gave information about the U.S. asylum process while the children of those mostly female migrants played. The migrants were warned that they could face long periods of separation from their children and lengthy detention if they are allowed to stay in the U.S. The migrants plan to head to the border on Sunday, still Sunday, setting up a showdown with the Trump administration, which has warned that some could face detention, prosecution, and deportation. Most Central American migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. cite the threat of gang violence in their homelands. The lawyers and advocates met one-on-one with some of the migrants, but did not coach them on what to say and what not to say when they meet with U.S. immigration officers on Sunday, said Alex Mensing, an organizer of the effort with the Pueblos Sin Fronteras group. Homeland Security Christian Nielsen warned this week that any person trying to cross into the U.S. who makes false claims to immigration authorities will be subject to criminal prosecution. She said prosecution was also possible for any people who might assist or coach immigrants to make false claims in bids to enter the U.S. Nielsen's threat is consistent with the administration's narrative of widespread asylum fraud and claims that asylum seekers are coached on what to tell U.S. authorities. The secretary also said asylum seekers in the caravan should ask protection in the first safe country they reach, including Mexico. That is international law. Asylum seekers seek protection in the first safe country they reach. And that's Mexico, all right? They all came through Mexico. They're from El Salvador. They're from Honduras. They're from Nicaragua or Guatemala. And they came to Mexico, so they should first seek protection in Mexico. Mensing said the lawyers helping the migrants might offer opinions on individual cases, just like any lawyer would for a client. We always emphasize you have to tell the truth, Mensing said. Caravans have been a fairly common tactic for advocacy groups to bring attention to asylum seekers, and the latest is smaller than previous efforts compared to previous border surges, but gained huge visibility after Trump unleashed strong criticism when it began March 25th in the Mexican city of Tepechuala, near the Guatemalan border. The caravan drew as many as 1,000 people as it crossed Mexico, as Trump and top aides portrayed them as a significant threat and evidence of a dysfunctional border. Trump cited the caravan as justification for the border wall he wants to build, even though the asylum seekers plan to turn themselves into border inspectors and are legally entitled to seek protection. He said he ordered the Homeland Security Department to stop the caravan. As Sunday's showdown at the busy Tijuana-San Diego border crossing neared, Amnesty International hoisted a billboard promoting the right to asylum in the U.S. on a truck in Tijuana that drove around the city. Well, it wasn't. I don't think it was Trump's tweets that brought this to light so much as it was there was someone in the caravan that called himself a journalist for one of the liberal sites, and he was giving daily reports, and I think it was those reports that were then picked up by other media that caused this caravan to gain such notoriety. Let's hope that no one gets hurt tomorrow as the sort of showdown happens It looks like they're going to approach the U.S. border, and they're going to ask for asylum. I don't know how the Homeland Security is going to handle this, but I just hope that no one gets hurt. GDP 2.3%. GDP is apparently slowing a bit. We had hoped that the first year of the Trump administration would reach a 3%. Well, this is the first quarter GDP, okay? All right, so this is the final adjustment of the first quarter GDP. Or is this the January to March quarter? If that's the case, then this would be the first estimate. The U.S. economy slowed in the first quarter as consumer spending grew at its weakest pace in nearly 5 years, but the setback is likely temporary against the backdrop of a tightening labor market and large fiscal stimulus. Gross domestic product increased at a 2.3% annual rate, the Commerce Department said in its snapshot of first quarter. Yes, this is the January to March quarter of this year. Also held back by moderation in business spending on equipment investment and home building. The economy grew economists said the economy grew at a 2.9% pace in the fourth quarter. Economists polled by Reuters had forecast output rising at a 2.0% rate in the January to March period. The first quarter growth pace is, however, probably not a true reflection of the economy despite the weakness in consumer spending. First quarter GDP tends to be sluggish because of a seasonal quirk. The labor market is near full employment and both business and consumer confidence are growing. Economists expect growth will accelerate in the second quarter as households start to feel the impact of the Trump administration's $1.5 trillion income. Well, it used to be 1.3. What happened to where did they get the extra $200 billion? Well, anyway, a few $100 billion here or there. Tax cuts came into effect in January. Lower corporate and individual tax rates, as well as increased government spending, will likely lift annual economic growth to the administration's 3% target, despite the weak start to the year. Federal Reserve officials are likely to shrug off tepid first quarter growth. The U.S. Central Bank raised interest rates last month in a nod to the strong labor market and economy and forecast at least 2 rate hikes this year. Minutes of the March 2021 meeting published earlier this month showed policymakers expected that the first quarter softness would be transitory, citing residual seasonality in the data and more general lead to strong economic fundamentals. Growth in consumer spending, which accounts for more than 2/3 of U.S. economic activity, braked to a 1.1% rate in the first quarter. That was the slowest pace since the second quarter of 2013, and following the fourth quarter's robust 4.0% growth rate. So I'd like you to notice that the Federal Reserve is watching these numbers, and when growth goes up, they decide, okay, we have to raise interest rates. And when growth is soft, then they say, well, we would normally maybe lower interest rates, but because we don't like the president, we think we'll just keep them the same. Federal Reserve system created in 1913, and notice that it was created prior to the crash of 1929. And the crash of 1929, many economists say, was directly related to the creation of the Federal Reserve. Yes, there were crashes before the Federal Reserve System was created. There were recessions, but they were not as deep or prolonged as the depression of that followed the 1929 stock market crash turned out to be. Because the Federal Reserve is creating bubbles. It's creating bubbles. The housing market bubble, for example, of some years back. That was created by the Federal Reserve and by Congress too, but especially by the Federal Reserve. So this is why the Chinese Constitution outlaws a central bank. Money supply and this kind of thing can be handled by the free market. Can be handled by the free market. It was handled by the free market in the United States between 1836 and 1913. 1836 is when President Jackson got rid of the central bank, the Bank of the United States, I think it was called. But then in 1913, it came back, saying, "Oh no, we have to smooth out the business cycles." Well, they haven't done that, have they? They have not done that at all. We have to fight inflation. No, we have to make sure that everybody's employed. Well, all those objectives can be met much more efficiently by the free market. Cheonryu Constitution outlaws in the Constitution the creation of a central bank. All right. Well, let's see. I think there was an article on the Fed, wasn't there? Maybe not. Okay. All right. Let's take another break now, and we'll come back in a minute or so with more news from a Cheonryu perspective.
Hi there, folks, and look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Casul with an octagonal barrel, magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door, and look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. Pretty accurate, though. That's our target. Oh boy! Massive repo.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 28th, 2018. I'm Tim Miller, sitting in for the second King of Cheonryu. World Tribune offers an important revelation. Yes, there's a poll that finds that most Americans communicate with God. Hallelujah. A new Pew Research poll found that 75% of Americans say they talk to God, and 28% say God responds. So I guess the 47%? It's a one-way street, I guess, okay? Such findings may defy the conventional wisdom of a secularized culture, increasingly influenced by group norms, but shed light on the private thoughts of individual Americans. The poll also found a decline in the number of Americans who believe in the God of the Bible. 1/3 of Americans say they do not believe in the God of the Bible, but that they believe there is some other higher power or spiritual force in the universe, Pew said. A slim majority of Americans, 56%, say they believe in God as described in the Bible, and 1 in 10 do not believe in any higher power or spiritual force. Most respondents who believe in the biblical God say God is very rewarding. And 97% said God loves all. 97% said God has protected them. 87% said God has rewarded them. 70% said God determines what happens to them. The poll also found, quote, in the U.S. belief in a deity is common even among the religiously unaffiliated, a group composed of those who identify themselves religiously as atheists, agnostic, or nothing in particular, and sometimes referred to collectively as religious nuns. Indeed, nearly three-quarters of religious nuns, 72%, believe in a higher power of some kind, even if not in God as described in the Bible. But when they say God is described in the Bible, I wonder if they're really reading the Bible, or if they are relying on media reports or even their own sort of churches, or if these people are not going to church, then their own sort of Sunday school experience. I think many atheists are former Sunday school students who somehow didn't get taught very well in those Sunday school lessons about God. And sometimes, parents or even Sunday school teachers will use God as kind of a boogeyman. If you don't live right, then God is going to punish you. This kind of a thing, which is kind of unfortunate because it creates a kind of resentment against God and kind of a misunderstanding about God. I hope that we can spread the teaching about God that is taught in the original substance of divine principle. That God is a God of Shimjong. Shimjong being that irrepressible force, was it? Oh boy, I'm a little bit stuck right now. Irrepressible urge, I guess, irrepressible urge within a subject partner to experience joy by giving love to an object partner. That God created the universe not because he had a choice, but he had to create a universe. He had no choice because God needed an object partner through which he could experience joy, and because he had this irrepressible impulse within him. That's an irrepressible impulse. Thank you. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Yeah, see there? Irrepressible impulse within him. I think that if that teaching of God can become more universal, then a lot more people will believe in God. I think one major reason that people don't believe in God is that they have been taught wrongly about God. Yes, and that's very unfortunate, very tragic, both for God and for the people, because eventually human beings need to develop that individual relationship with God. You talk about proofs of God. I believe in God because I have a relationship with Him, and I experience Him. When I was growing up, I had some experiences with God, and of course, there was some ups and downs and so forth. But after a certain point in time, all sort of doubt was erased. I spoke previously about my experience 1 years ago, where God actually spoke to me, a very short and probably less than 10 words, but that was a very powerful experience. So when you have an experience with God, and you don't have to have that kind of a, thing where God actually speaks to you in an audible voice. You don't have to have that kind of an experience. You can just feel God within you. You can experience God within you. And I think many people have those kinds of experiences. And eventually, we all have to develop a personal relationship with God. That's what He wants. That's what He wants. And that is where salvation lies as well. So what's the best way to do that? Well, I would say that the best way to develop a personal relationship with God is to unite with and attend the person who is the representative heir and the heir and representative body of the of Christ, who is God incarnate, who is fully man, fully God. That would be the best way to develop a relationship with God, I would say. Yeah. That's the best way. Okay, so let's stay on the World Tribune for a moment here. An interesting article that Mattis, the U.S. Department, Jim Mattis, here confirms he ordered Russian mercenary force to be annihilated. Wow, I haven't seen this anyplace else. In the crowded battlefield that is Syria, U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis confirmed he gave the order for an enemy force that included Russian mercenaries to be annihilated. Mattis made the revelation during testimony to the Senate Armed Services Committee on April 26th. Senator Deb Fischer, Nebraska Republican, asked Mattis about the February attack on U.S. forces in Syria by a group that included Russian mercenaries. Did you use that deconflicted line in communication with the Russians when it was reported in February that there were large numbers of Russian irregular forces that had attacked U.S. forces? Fisher asked. Mattis responded, "It was used, Senator. The Russian High Command in Syria assured us it was not their people, and my direction to the chairman was for the force then to be annihilated, and it was." Annihilated means all killed. Fisher also asked, are the Russian forces actively harassing American forces in Syria? And what do you believe is an appropriate response if you agree that they are? Mattis responded, I cannot target the responsibility to the Russians right now. As you know, it's a crowded battlefield, and it's also got Iranians there, and of course the regime forces as well. Right now in Syria, we have an odd and somewhat open and never interrupted deconfliction communication line. Mattis said, it's worked pretty well to make certain we don't run afoul of one another's forces or one another's operations. They are not coordinated. They're deconflicted in either time or space, mostly in space. The river, for example, the Euphrates, divides our activities in some cases. Yeah, well. So there was a group of fighters that were fighting American forces, and they included some Russian mercenaries. And so Mattis contacted the Russians and said, hey, we've got this group that's fighting us, and we see some Russians in there. Are these your people? And the Russians said, no, we don't know them. And so then Mattis ordered the entire group to be annihilated. That means killed to the last man. And that's what happened. That's war. That's war. That's war. But this article shows how easily we could become involved in a war with Russia as a result of the Syria operation. And so it's kind of a little bit of a scary situation. But that's the kind of thing that the defense secretary, deals with every day. And so he's always trying to deconflict. In other words, don't get into a war with the Russians. That's what deconfliction means. All right. Let's look here. Brazil leads the world in murderous cities, followed by Mexico, Venezuela, and the U.S. Here, a Mexican NGO called the Consejo very long and difficult to pronounce name, which means a Citizen Council for Public Security and Penal Justice, whose president is Jose Antonio Ortega Sanchez, released a list of the world's 50 cities with the highest homicide rates in 2017. In order to be on the list, the city must have at least 300,000 inhabitants. The ranking is based on homicide rates calculated per 100,000 inhabitants. Cities in war zones are not included in the ranking. Of the 50 most murderous cities, 42 were in Latin America, and 47, all but 3, were in the Western Hemisphere. The country with the most cities in the top 50 was Brazil, with 17 cities. Mexico was in second place with 12 cities, plus half the top 10 cities were in Mexico. In third place was Venezuela with 5 cities on the most murderous cities list. The United States was in fourth place with 5 cities on the list, including one in Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory in the Caribbean. South Africa, the only country on the list not in the Western Hemisphere, had 3 cities. Colombia also had 3. Honduras had 2. El Salvador, Guatemala, and Jamaica each had 1. Well, one of the things, of course, you got to remember, you got different numbers of cities, all right? I mean, in America, we got lots of cities. Whereas, what, El Salvador? How many cities does El Salvador have? Not a lot. I'll bet less than 10 of 300,000 each. Yeah? Los Cabos, located on the tip of Mexico's Baja California Peninsula, entered the 50 most murderous cities list for the very first time and went straight to the top to be the world's most murderous city. There were 365 murders in Los Cabos, one for each day of the year, among a population of only 328,245, making for a murder rate of 111.33 per 100,000. That's a pretty high rate. Caracas, Venezuela, was the second most murderous city on the planet, with 3,387 murders in a population of 3,046,104, which was a murder rate of 111.19 out of 100,000. Acapulco, Mexico was number 3 with 106. Natal, Brazil, number 4 with a rate of 102. 2 Mexican cities were in 5th and 6th place. Tijuana at number 5 with a rate of 100.77, and La Paz with a rate of 84.79. Fortaleza, Brazil, with number 7 with a rate of 83.48. Ciudad Victoria, Mexico, was number 8. And a city in Venezuela called Guyana, not to be confused with the country of Guyana, was number 9. And rounding out the top 10 was Belém, Brazil, with a rate of 71.38. As for Mexico, it had 12 cities on the list, in contrast to only 8 cities last year. Los Cabos, Acapulco, Tijuana, La Paz, Ciudad Victoria, and other cities here, Chihuahua City, Tepic, Reynosa, Mazatlan, okay. And U.S. cities on the list, St. Louis, St. Louis, Baltimore. Okay, so Detroit was actually, among the U.S. cities, Detroit was number 5. So worse than Detroit. How come Chicago's not on this list? What's the murder rate in Chicago? I would have expected Chicago to be on this list. Let's see, murder rate in Chicago per 100,000 population. Let's see, maybe yeah, per 100,000. All right, well, why isn't Chicago on the list? Let's see here. I'm looking right now. Anyway, okay. Chicago, I guess, got off the hook. Anyway, St. Louis is the most murderous city in the U.S., according to this. 65.83 murders per 100,000 population. And that was an increase, almost a 10% increase over the previous year. In Baltimore, number 21 on the top 50 was number 2 in the U.S. with 55.48 increase also there for almost 10% increase over the previous year. And San Juan of Puerto Rico was number 3 among U.S. cities 48.70. New Orleans was 41 on the top 50. And Detroit, number 42 on the top 50. Yeah. So St. Louis, Baltimore, San Juan, New Orleans, and Detroit. What is the common thread? Well, Democratic administrations, looks to like to me. All right. Let's take a short break, and we'll come back with our last segment.
Firearms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for April 28th, 2018. Yes, I got it right this time. And Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of China, Hyung Jin-moon. I want to finish out this broadcast underlining what I said previously about North Korea. And we can look at the Breitbart article, Donald Trump hopeful to achieve peace with North Korea for the world. And we read previously about his story. But I think, the bank robbery analogy, or the bank robbery comparison here is an accurate one. So you got a bank, and there's a bank robber inside the bank who is holding people hostage. All right, he's got a gun to people's necks and stuff like that. And the bank is surrounded by a SWAT team. All right, so so when the SWAT team is there, what are they trying to do? Well, before they go in full force, they want to remove as many of the hostages as they can, right? If the bank robber has 50 hostages, they'd like to get all 50 out if they can. But they're going to negotiate with the robber, with the hostage taker, to get as many of those hostages out as they can. Because if they go in there with the hostages still inside, people could get caught in the crossfire, and some will die. And that's not good. They want to save the hostages. They want to catch the bank robber, but they want to save the hostages. All right? So I think that is what President Trump is doing right now. He's negotiating with Kim Jong-un, the bank robber, to get the hostages out of the bank, which is the Korean Peninsula, so that the SWAT team can go in full force, which is, the full force of the U.S. military against North Korea. In order to, in this case, they're not trying to arrest the bank robber. They're trying to actually denuclearize North Korea. So I'm pretty sure that's what's happening here. That President Trump is he's saying, peace in our time, peace in our time. Getting the hostages out of the bank does not bring conclusion to the situation, right? I mean, it's the conclusion to the situation happens when the bank robber is put down or is arrested. So bringing the hostages out does not, they say, oh, that's peace, that's peace, that's peace. It's not peace. That simply sets up the situation where the SWAT team can go in. And I think that's what's happening on the Korean Peninsula. President Donald Trump signaled optimism that he could achieve peace with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, saying he felt he had a responsibility to succeed. It's certainly something that I hope I can do for the world, Trump said. This is beyond the United States. This is a world problem. And he says, honestly, I wish it was handled earlier. Yeah, I think he's right. It should have been handled earlier. But, you know, Clinton, Bush, Obama, they all just simply kicked the can down the road, saying, oh, the next administration will take care of it. Oh, I don't want to jeopardize my legacy by getting a lot of Americans killed on the Korean Peninsula. But that can has been kicked down the road until you come to the end of the road. And it happens that President Trump is in office, and I think we're very fortunate that he is in office. Think what would happen if we had Clinton in there, Hillary Clinton in the office now dealing with this issue. She wouldn't have the first idea of how to do this. The president would not comment when asked if he had spoken to Jong-un. I think they mean Kim. Trump also thanked Chinese President Xi Jinping for helping the United States bring North Korea to the table with tough sanctions. He did it, and he did it because of a relationship that we have. So, all right, you know, propping each other up and sort of, you know, saying nice things about each other, that's all part of the game. I understand. And I'm sure Trump understands it as well. You know, you see it going on all the time. I hope Trump turned around and said, oh, man, I wish I didn't have to say that BS. But, yeah, I mean, come on. Xi Jinping is the greatest murderer that we have in the world today. And he's instituting a system where he can monitor 1.3 billion or 1.6 billion, or however many people he has. Maybe finally China can figure out what the population actually is. So maybe with this universal surveillance system, with this universal surveillance system that they can monitor their entire population in, 2 seconds or 4 seconds or something like that, that they can actually figure out, they can actually count the number of people who are living in their country. Trump was also scoffed at diplomatic experts who were skeptical of his decision to negotiate with Kim Jong-un. I get a big kick out of that, he said. And he's right. You know, always what I found when I was a reporter and later also in reading was that the State Department and the U.S. diplomatic community in general considers a conversation with the U.S. president to be a reward for good behavior. It's not a reward, you know. Sometimes it can be, but in this case, it was a real necessity. It was a real necessity to get things going. I think the President Trump will be remembered as the president who brought about the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. But I don't think it's going to happen through peaceful means, unfortunately. The only way that it could happen through peaceful means is if the South Korean people are educated. Well, peaceful means and centering on free market economy, I would say. That I'm very. If it were through peaceful means and centering on China, then yeah, that I think is possible. But centering on free market, religious liberty, that kind of a thing. To do that, we would have to really do a huge campaign to educate the South Korean people on the dangers of North Korean ideology, Juche ideology, which they do not appreciate right now, and the truth about North Korea. They would have to be educated on that. All the information on the hundreds of thousands of people who are in North Korean re-education camps or slave camps would have to be revealed. The truth about Kim Jong-un's Joy Brigade, or Satisfaction Brigade, would have to be revealed to show what kind of inhumane practices go on in North Korea, to show the truth about their income inequality, how it's even worse than in South Korea. This kind of thing will all have to be revealed. And then perhaps we could have reunification, peaceful reunification, centering on a free market economy and religious liberty, something like that, what you have in the South. But barring that, I'm afraid that military action is the only way that this is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then if North Korea is allowed to continue to exist on its current regime, then North Korea will continue to be a security threat to the United States. So we'll see if President Trump can get the hostages out of the bank, and we'll see what he does once they are out. But I really caution anyone from thinking that the situation in Korea is going towards peace. I caution it very much. It's just going towards getting the hostages out of the bank so that the SWAT team can move in. That's what's happening. All right, we're coming to the end of our broadcast. Thank everyone for tuning in today. If you came in late, please refer to the first hour where I went through the May 15th primary election candidates here in the 8th District of Pennsylvania. And I also talked about how you can get your own sample ballot if you're living elsewhere in the United States. But also I think for people outside the United States, it gives a little bit of an insight on how things are done in terms of elections in the United States. I think that is a good education for people to have, because it's a good way to start preparing for Cheongguk. Thank you very much for tuning in, and spring is coming. Today is going to be a rather warmish day, kind of warm. Tomorrow's going to be cool. Tomorrow's going to be cool. In fact, tomorrow night, temperature's going to get back down to freezing or near there. Wow. Can't seem to get away. But I don't think we'll see snow. If I wake up in the morning and I see snow, I'm going to let out one of those primal yells, just like the Democrats did, when they were yelling about Trump being elected. It's going to be like, ah! If I see snow again. But anyway, hopefully it will not. Yes, let's hope. Not that snow is going to do anything. It's not going to accumulate or anything like that. Just the psychological. We're ready for spring, all right? Please. So no more snow. Thank you, and have a good day. God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.